Welcome to Season 3, Episode 15 of the Be Conscious podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing the amazing Tricia Brouk. Here we go.
Welcome to the Be Conscious podcast, the show that brings you enlightened perspectives on the frequency of money, life's many challenges, and those heavy feelings that may be holding you back from living your best life. And now your host, Dr. Susan Nicholas.
Tricia Brouk is an international award-winning director. She founded the Big Talk Academy and was the executive producer of TEDx Lincoln Square. She curates the Speaker Salon in New York City, hosts the Big Talk, and award-winning podcast, and her book, The Influential Voice, Saying What You Mean for Lasting Legacy. Her book pre-released as the #1 new release on Amazon. Tricia, welcome to the Be Conscious podcast. Did I miss anything?
Susan, I am so excited to be here with you today. You did not miss a thing. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Tricia. It's wonderful to have you, and particularly on this eve of your new book. I was reading your book, and I was I was surprised because I knew that it was going to touch on racism. And then as I got into it, I read a lot more about finding your purpose and passion, listening, quieting the inner critic, kind of like a more conscious look at speaking. And, of course, bringing forth your big idea that's worth sharing, worth speaking about. But before we go into your book, which we're definitely going to do, I want to learn a little bit more about Tricia Brouk. You were a dancer. I was reading you did ballet. You grew up in Minnesota on a farm. And I just what brings us to this amazing being that you are today with your whole host of speaking, I would say kind of like businesses, your speaking platform to help speakers, if you will. You helped me. What brought you to here? Can you share with us your life and this journey that brings us here today?
It starts in Arnold, Missouri, not Minnesota, but Missouri. Midwest starting with an M, same, almost the same. And it means that I grew up in a small town where being conscious was something nobody talked about, nobody knew about. And when I realized that I was in the wrong place and that I needed to be in diversity, that I needed to experience more in my life, I didn't know how I was going to do that. Young girl living on a farm in Missouri, everybody looks like her, not knowing why I didn't fit in, why I didn't feel right. I went to see my sister's dance recital, and she was on the stage dressed as a pink poodle, and there were probably 50 little kids up on that stage doing flat ball change and shuffle off to Buffalo. And that was not what sparked my interest. What sparked my interest is that being on stage was a thing. You could actually perform. You could be on stage and entertain an audience. And I thought, this is for me. And this is how I'm going to get out of here. And from that moment on, I pursued dance. And luckily, my dance teacher, my mentor, Sharon McGuire, who is still my mentor, she just received a signed copy of my book in the mail yesterday. She was very open-minded. She was very driven. She taught me how to be driven. She taught me amazing technique. That's the other thing, is that I actually learned really good technique from a dance teacher in a small town, which doesn't happen very often. I pursued my career in dance from the age of 7 when I saw my sister on that big stage. And I knew that I was going to move to New York and become a dancer. I knew I was going to do it. I knew that's how I was going to do it. I knew that's how I was going to get out of Arnold, Missouri. And what was so amazing is that my dance teacher and mentor, she started taking me to New York City on these summer vacations. We would go to the Broadway Dance School when it was still on Broadway. We would go to Steps. I would study with Frank Hatchett. I was introduced to diversity. I was introduced to different kinds of foods, and it was life-changing, life-altering. She showed me what was possible. And she also taught me confidence, and that's because she believed in me. Cut to wanting to move to New York before I went to college. That's the one thing my parents would not allow, and it was the best decision they ever made for me. I went to University of Missouri in Columbia to get my journalism degree because that's the school we could afford. And I thought, how am I going to ever leave dance? How am I going to live without being a dancer? And what I did, which was really smart, was I realized, okay, there's another college in the same town as the University of Missouri. It's called Stevens College. It's a small liberal arts women's college that has a dance department. How do I get myself into those dance classes? And what I found is if you're enrolled in one, you can take free classes at the other. So I was going full time at MU and was taking dance classes for free at Stevens. What I didn't realize is I really liked being in a women's college. I was seen, I was heard. And before I knew it, the department chair gave me a full scholarship. So I transferred after my first semester, going to a massive university. And that particular school had a 3-year, 2-summer program, which meant I could move to New York City in 3 years. And that's what I did. I graduated from Stevens College with a BFA in dance, moved to New York City at 20, celebrated my 21st birthday alone with the busboys of the restaurant that I worked at, and it was amazing. Pursued my career in dance, started my own company for the first time because I was not interested in being a starving artist, and started a fitness company so that I could make money while I was touring around dancing. Ended up being in the Lucinda Childs Dance Company, toured all around Europe, performed with Robert Wilson at Lincoln Center, performed in Paris, performed in Vienna, performed at Palermo, had an incredible dance career. And then I realized I needed to have more impact. I wanted to have more impact, Susan, and that meant beyond the length of time I was on stage and the number of people in the theater. And I realized I can direct, I could write, I could produce, and I began doing that. And then 3 years ago, a friend of mine out of the blue said, I want you to direct my TED Talk. And I thought, that sounds super fun, just like a one-woman show. I will work with you on script analysis, intention, choreography, and blocking. And what was different about this experience, Susan, was when I'm working with my actors, it's about them. And when I was working with this thought leader, it was about the idea. It was about how she could share the message to serve more people. And it was so inspiring to me that I thought, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't know that speaking and coaching and directing speakers was a thing. And then she planted the seed that I should do this. And when I began mentoring speakers, what I realized in that moment was the ripple effect of having an impact globally on humanity, and how it became my mission to amplify and elevate voices in order to make the world a better place. And I am in purpose, and I am serving in such a greater way. And that is why I get up every morning. That's where I'm at.
Wow, I remember, since knowing you, that you made this transition from dance to voice and really empowered voices. And it kind of, when I think about paths in life, when you were young and you said, I got to get out of here. And I think dance is the way out, or my way out. I kind of had that experience where I grew up in a very small, impoverished town, and I thought education was my way out of poverty. I could educate my way through. And then we realized that that was maybe I call it like a chosen path. Sometimes you're really good at your chosen path, like you. I mean, just a very accomplished dancer, and just you you did it so well. And my parallel was I went into medicine and I did surgery, and I always thought I was pretty good at it. I was good at that technical part of being a surgeon. But then you have this kind of awareness, something shifts, changes, and you realize that there's like a deeper richness or pearl. There's something in you almost that you were always destined to do, but it took that first journey to get there. It took you, getting out of your, the small town. You said, I don't fit in. And I loved how you said the wrong place. I was in the wrong place. And I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that because I think when we look at how we began, it seems like it's a big mistake. Like I used to think I was adopted. It was so hysterical because I was like, "There's no way that I belonged with my parents in that town in those circumstances." And then I realized very early on that there was no agency in the world on the planet that would have given my parents a child. And so that I must have been born to them. And so I had that awareness in my late teens. But I wonder, if you look back from this evolved Tricia, this powerhouse of a woman, this influential, like beautiful person that you have become, and if that wrong place was actually the exact right place to get you where you are today.
Without question, Susan, I would not change a thing about my history, my relationships. I absolutely am exactly where I am meant to be and supposed to be based on every single experience I have had. And when I say wrong place, wrong meaning didn't fit in there, and right place because it taught me what I believe in. It taught me my values. Every single thing about where I grew up has brought me to this place in this moment in time and has given me the wherewithal, the values, the purpose, the mission, and my ability to have deep, profound compassion and empathy for everyone is because of how I grew up. Absolutely.
Well, I love that because I think that it takes a while for us to come to that space where we recognize that everything that has happened in our life, whether for better or for worse, no matter how the triumphs, the lows, how palatable or unpalatable it had been, all brings us to this very moment. That all of those things were necessary to for us to come into this fuller space, this place of awareness and fullness in life. You mentioned that I read it in your book, and I've heard you mention it that on this journey of being in service to humanity, elevating voices, doing something that you said you never wanted to have children, but you always wanted to do something. You always wanted to be of service in some part of your life. Did you feel that there was a trade off, like one or the other, or just you never had the desire? You knew you would work in the world in a different way.
I never had the desire to have children, and it's not something that ever changed. I never had the feeling, I never had the desire. I am an amazing aunt to my friends' kids and to my husband's kids and my husband's sister's kids. It was not something that I ever had a calling for. And I also was super clear that I wanted to leave a legacy. Did not know what that legacy would be because most people leave a legacy through their children. How am I going to show up in a way that leaves a lasting legacy on this planet? My dance can't do that because dance is a fleeting art form. When the show is over, so is the dancing. I then thought, well, I could make movies and leave a legacy that way. And I have made award-winning documentary films, so I can leave a legacy that way. When I realized that working with speakers and mentoring speakers and supporting them in sharing their powerful message, that's the legacy that I'm leaving behind. Every single person who shares their story, and that person shares their story, and that person shares their story, that is the kind of lasting legacy that I am now able to leave. And it has nothing to do with having children.
Well, I love that because I think women in this kind of global culture, if you will, um, there's an expectation there, and not everyone wants to do that. And so I really appreciate you saying that and making the distinction that legacy doesn't have to equate or mean or be equivalent to a family legacy, but this is like a bigger global legacy.
Thank you for saying that, Susan. And I want to highlight a little bit more for your audience and for your listeners, because when a woman makes a conscious choice to not have children, it's really important that you understand that it's because she's making a conscious choice to not have children. I have been asked before, "Oh, you don't have children?" Or, "Well, you'd be such a great mother." Maybe I would be. And, "Oh, you didn't have children," is not because I couldn't have children. And I want to just be clear that there are women out there who are making a conscious choice to show up in the world in a different way, and that that's their decision and it should be honored.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, and I love that you said that. I definitely, in my surgery and my time in medicine and whatnot, had also confronted that, not with just myself, but I've heard other women, and I always thought it was such an empowered choice. And I have a son, and so it's not a choice that I ultimately made, but I almost did. And there's a whole lot about life paths and things like that. But I really appreciate that. I can really appreciate you and you standing in that. You standing in that.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about. I remember when you, Tricia, were coaching me for my first TED. I had asked you if you had done a TED, and you said no. And I remember I was taken back because I thought, oh my gosh, you talk about speaking and the big talk and this, but you danced. It seems like you danced on a big stage, but you didn't necessarily speak on one. I think to do what you do, it involves a great deal of confidence, and I love it because sometimes I feel I lack in confidence. Or that's one of my things, like my limiting beliefs that you talk about, that I don't know enough to do this or that. But you seem that you were inspired to coach other speakers. And you have a beautiful podcast, and I know that as a speaking platform as well. So I'm not suggesting, that you don't speak or you don't use your voice, because you do, but the way that you prepare other people to show up is not how you personally do it. Do I understand that?
Not exactly, and I'll tell you why, Susan. Being in the world of showbiz my entire career has been about directing and coaching and mentoring. And when I was a dancer, I was on the other side of that table, which means I would receive the coaching and the direction and the
Mm-hmm.
feedback from my choreographers, from my directors, etc. And what I learned from that, being a dancer and being a performer, is that we do not have to be scared of our director in order to do good work. We do not have to be embarrassed, criticized, yelled at, humiliated in
Mm-hmm.
order to be a successful performer. And that is old school. Most dancers are terrified of making a mistake, of being overweight, of everything, because that's old school mentality. When
Mm-hmm.
I changed to the other side of the table and became the director, the person auditioning the dancers and the actors, it was my job and my mission to make a safe space for everyone, because that's when the real magic happens. When that room is safe, the vulnerability happens, the honest reactions happen, the truth comes out, and that's when the best work happens. That's when the most beautiful art is created. And that is my experience in terms of directing. I create a safe space for my actors so the scene can be honest. I create a safe space for my speakers so they can be authentic in their delivery. And by directing, by coaching in that way, that is how I'm able to uh, mentor and shepherd speakers onto really big stages. As a dancer, I never used my voice. As a director and a choreographer and a producer, I'm always using my voice. I teach speaking. I teach what it means to have limitless creation. I teach now what it means to be an influential voice. And I think what you're saying makes sense. And also, I put into practice what I teach and mentor my speakers every single day, because that's how we show up as good human beings in the world. It's not just limited to being on stage.
Well, thank you for that. The reason I brought that up is because I was doing hosting a room on Clubhouse or moderating a room on imposter syndrome. And a lot of that comes from never doing it yourself and feeling inadequate or unable. And it's a story we tell ourselves. And then I remember raising this argument while I was moderating this room about being the president, about how no one is the president before they're the president. Like they've never done the job.
Right.
They may have done things around it, related, maybe unrelated, but they've never actually done it. And some people can do it remarkably well, even if it's the first time. It's their first time doing it. And, I think about myself, starting companies or anybody that's an entrepreneur or doing something. We're all in that same vein, in that same energy of doing something that we've never done before, that we haven't done ourselves, and still finding within us somewhere the confidence, the wherewithal, that the gut, the truth of us. Like you said, that's always going to come out. Like there was something that I would say, intuitively knew that it felt right. When you had this opportunity to shift from being the performer to directing someone on the stage and getting their voice out, it seemed like it was like that. Like this feels like I'm good at this. I don't know how or why, but I'm great at it. Maybe you did know why. And I'm going to go forward in this new vein. And you said you did that about 3 or so years ago, if I got that correct.
Yeah, I was not in the online space. I did not have the big talk as a company. I was just making movies, working in film, television, and theater, writing plays and musicals, producing my shows, and realized when I began working with speakers that the impact could be greater and that the legacy was going to be long lasting. And I think, did I know I was good at it? I wasn't even thinking about whether or not I was good at it, Susan. It was more about my speakers are turning into new people. The transformation of the speaker when they come to me and when they leave me is something that is so humbling and so remarkable. And that's what I was bearing witness to, the transformation of these speakers. And it never really dawned on me that I was good at what I did. It was simply, I get to watch transformation happen in real time.
Well, with that, I want to take a little break and I want to come back and talk about your new book, The Influential Voice. I'm really excited about this next part of our conversation. Stay with me.
Like what you're hearing so far, make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. How would you describe your relationship with money? Did you ever imagine that your deepest feelings and beliefs about money could be preventing you from acquiring all the wealth that you desire? Click the link below in the show notes to learn more about Dr. Nicholas's highly sought-after Frequency of Money program to positively transform your relationship with money. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, back to the show.
The influential voice, in the beginning of it, you talk a little bit about racism and using your voice powerfully, to stand up for this institutional wrong, if you will. But as I go deeper into it, as I mentioned earlier, it's about really finding your purpose and your passion, about listening and quieting that inner critic, about sharing your big idea, about leaving your legacy. I wanted to read a quote from your book, and I'm hoping you'll respond to it. It says, I know I needed to use my voice to give voice to yet another gunned down Black man in order to understand how I am a part of the problem and how I can be a part of the solution. And then from there, you said you created the Big Talk Roundtable, a conscious conversation. Tricia, I guess when I look at this, I think, what is it about this racial issue in America that you wanted to, I would say, tackle it or speak to it? And then who are you to speak to it? Like what is it in your gut, in your soul that says I need to speak to this particular issue?
Such a great and complicated question, Susan. And I feel very passionately about equality. I feel very passionately about systemic racism and how we, by not speaking about it, by staying silent, we are complicit. And when George Floyd was murdered, I had already been making documentaries about race and immigration. And I have a very, very diverse, consciously diverse and inclusive community. And the reason that I feel so responsible in having a diverse community, in leading in this way, is because I, as a woman of privilege, can talk about it and need to talk about it so that other people can learn how to talk about it. And am I the perfect person to talk about it? I don't know. But what I do know is it is my responsibility to talk about race in a dignified, respectful, responsible way. And that's why I brought together the roundtable discussion, because I want to know how I am part of the problem and how I can be part of the solution. And by risking the criticism as a white woman who is talking about race, I am risking the criticism, and simultaneously I'm having the conversation so that I can potentially model how to do it for others.
So when you conducted your roundtable, I know it was taped and recorded, but did you feel ridiculed or anything like that? I mean, I'm just curious, were you surprised at how you bringing this forth, how people responded to you, or did they even think anything about you being a woman or what your ethnic or racial background is? Does it really matter? I mean, who speaks about this?
Not in my community, Susan, for sure. Not in my community.
And did you what if you could share with our listeners maybe a couple of key takeaways? Like, what did you learn from that experience, and what would you like to share with us? What would you like us to know about it?
Well, I'd love to share what I learned about Nydia Hahn feeling othered, and how Tamika Felder reminded me and the rest of the community members on the call that being in action is how to be an ally. It doesn't mean posting once about Black Lives Matter. It means being in action. It means having conversations. It means being uncomfortable with not knowing how to talk about racism. We are not taught how to talk about racism. And therefore, people just make the decision to not talk about it. And not talking about racism does not make you not racist. So that's something that I also learned, is being in action shows allyship. And this is another thing I learned, Susan, which I'll share with you and your listeners, is that as a white person, we must earn the trust of people of color. And that is something I did not think about because I'm inclusive. So I think that was something that was really powerful that I took away from that call.
And when you say trust, you mean trusted with the truth? Acceptance.
Yeah.
And so, okay. I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I agree with you about the silence part. About, it can. Oh gosh, I had this conversation with my father about silence not meaning complicit. Like that um, eh, that it doesn't necessarily mean that. That in silence sometimes we are observing. And so, okay, this is a. I'm glad we're talking about this because this is a place that I have struggled speaking about.
Mm.
And I come from a mixed heritage, and I personally don't subscribe to racism. Like I don't feel like I feel like all people are created equal. Like that's not part of my belief that someone is better or worse depending on certainly not their skin. I find that to be absurd.
Yeah.
And so I kind of I often find myself an observer. And in that place of an observing, I recognize that there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of past, all right, let me put it this way. In my consciousness, I realize that we are called to be present. And when we are suffering, we are often dredging up the past, no matter how unjust or just or how we perceive it. But we have grievances and pains from the past, or we are in pain because we have fear of the future, the unknown part of it, of not knowing how things are going to work out, if you're going to have enough, this or that. But when we are present, we are well. We're typically well in the moment. And I think there's a lot that we don't understand about the whole of existence, like how, and why everything works as it does. And coming from a place of questioning accidents that I remember reading about, this was an accident, I did this accidentally, but you realize there are no accidents. So no matter what we're seeing, it's it's something. There's a learning in it for us.
Mm.
Even if we don't understand it, don't like it, people, there's all sorts of genocides and all sorts of things happening on the planet that we don't like it. It makes you feel awful. It's confusing at times. You don't know why people are fighting, what they're fighting for, why people are aggressive. And a lot of people are in fear. What's driving, a lot of this behavior is fear. And so I think about not silence as sitting on the sidelines. And I have written about race. I've written about it in my first book, The Duality of Being, but I'm not very vocal about it. But I don't feel like it makes me complicit. Thus I'm a racist person, or I don't support, or I don't believe everyone's equal. But I do find myself often observing this. Oh my gosh, I call it a construct. Like I believe it's a prevailing construct on the planet that is beckoning to be deconstructed, like to fall down. And when there's a cleansing, when there's a deconstruction, there often is a lot of pain and loss in that. And this is, I think, inherent in any struggle, no matter like whether it's women's suffrage, it's Holocaust, this or that, genocide, that, wars. There's destruction of a belief, and this is how it becomes exposed, and then thus it can then be, I'd say, shifted, the energy of it shifted. There's a shift in consciousness, a shift in awareness, and then it can be dismantled. Like almost that all of what is happening is necessary to break down a construct on this planet that serves no one. And so I just wanted to, oh gosh,
I just want to honor the fact that you started off by saying, Susan, I never talk about this. I don't know if I know how to talk about this. And you just so beautifully talked about exposing and dismantling a construct so that we can move into the next place we need to be. That was epic. And I just want to thank you for all of that.
well, I appreciate that. I think in your book you talk about challenging limiting beliefs, almost like getting out of your own way. And just like, as a child is saying, oh, I think I'm in the wrong place, or I think I'm adopted, I can't be here. And then you recognize that it was all necessary. And so I just wanted to hold that, and really like allow people to, I would say, have their journey, like their process, whatever their process is. Sometimes it's very vocal. Sometimes people protest and are violent. Like people, there's a lot of anger, and I don't know if one thing is right or wrong, but it all exists. It all exists, our response to these prevailing constructs that no longer serve us. We've seen it in religion. We've seen it with racism. We've seen it with money. We're also seeing this, I call it like the shift in the time construct, how we perceive time passing. Some of us feel like it's going really fast, and like if there's an acceleration, like of what we call the time construct, like things are shifting on this planet in a major way. In order for us to emerge, or I believe elevate our vibration, our consciousness, our frequency, to dismantle things that are no longer serving us. And when I say the time construct, I know that's for some people, very esoteric to talk about time, but it's kind of how we spend our time, like where we were commuting and we were working all the time. We didn't enjoy ourselves. We didn't, you know, our priorities were all screwy, and now we're to look at ourselves and to have time for introspection and healing and self-care and whatnot. That there's a shift on how we are using this resource, if you will, that we call our time. And so I didn't want to get too deep into this, but I love that you raised it. You raised this topic as kind of like the foundation of speaking with influence and leaving your legacy. So I wanted to thank you for that, and for standing in that power, and standing with whatever comes from it, to be able to stand in it. That is very courageous. And I'm very glad that it's you that you're speaking about this.
Thank you, Susan. That means a lot to me. And being able to be here with you in such a conscious way is something I've been looking forward to. And I think that's what makes this podcast and your work so profound, is that you are constantly becoming more conscious. And I think that is something that everyone who's listening can take away from this conversation for sure, but also apply in their own lives, is when we show up consciously in every aspect of our life, then we can actually have an impact and leave a legacy.
Well, I love that. And with that, Tricia, I want you, if you could share with our listeners where they can get your book, where they can learn more about you, about empowering their voices, the big talk. Please tell us everything.
Everything. Well, how
Yes.
long do you have? The book is at theinfluentialvoicebook.com. You can find me at triciabrouk.com. And I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And I also have interviewed you, Susan, on my podcast, The Big Talk. So feel free to take a listen over there as well.
Well, with that, Tricia, I am going to thank you and our listeners for this inner journey. I think this is a very important conversation. I love your book. It has exercises in it. I mean, there's a lot in there for people that have something to say. And I love how you say there's 7.8 billion people on the planet. Surely your message will resonate with at least one of them and potentially change their life. You said even save a life, and I love that. And as we go on our own perspective in our journeys, I want to remind everyone to be conscious. If you love this episode or if today's message resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Be Conscious podcast. I want to know what inspired you and what conscious topics you would like to hear more about. And if you want, you can share your thoughts with me at info@susannicholas.org.
Thanks for listening to the Be Conscious podcast with author, TEDx international speaker, and conscious coach, Dr. Susan Nicholas. Be sure to connect with her to stay up to date with her latest news and works. Learn more about her conscious speaking platform at susannicholas.org/speaking. Stay tuned for the next thought-provoking episode. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious.